My sister Amy, a number of years ago, went on a school trip to China. And she was really excited, but it was interesting. One thing she noticed when she got there was that what we eat as Chinese food here is not Chinese food. And she said she didn't recognize like any of the dishes you would find in an American buffet the entire time she was there. She's like, Aaron, the entire trip we didn't eat rice one time. And this is fascinating because you have this phenomenon that happens in America. We're this cultural melting pot, and we take stuff from other cultures and we like reshape it here into something like completely different. So you might not know this, but like fortune cookies, those were American inventions. The same with pizza as we know it. Alfredo, chicken parmesan. Sarah and I, we made this amazing soup. Zuppa Toscana, right? And then I looked it up, and it turns out it's nothing like the actual Tuscan soup in, Tuscany. It's an American invention. And that's constantly happening here with food and cultures and also religion in America. We have this thing called syncretism. As we're continuing our series talking about other religions, syncretism is not like saying all religions are true. What it is, it's blending them together. And so you can find this done with Christianity here in the States, with Christianity and literally any other kind of religious practice. So you have Christian polytheists. This was a quote from a website, putting the goddess, the sacred feminine, back into Judeo-Christianity. You have Christian witches. Christian animists, believing that there are spirits inhabiting the trees and rocks and stuff like that. You have Christian Zen meditation. You have Chrislam, which is a mashup of Christianity and Islam. You even have, this is Christianity and Hinduism. You even have Christian atheists. It blew my mind. Yeah, can you imagine? I actually read an article, guess where, the Huffington Post. This person saying, well, I don't believe God is real, but I really like, the cultural values that I grew up with. Now, for some people, it is puzzling why any of this would be bad. They're like, oh, I'm totally fine, and that's great. You want to have Jesus and Krishna holding hands and skipping down the road together. That's awesome. I bet you also like lasagna burgers at Olive Garden. In fact, this entire series, for people who have that viewpoint of like, why should we say no to any of this? This entire series that I'm doing will come off as really mean-spirited. Here I am as a stereotypical pastor, telling the people in my church, here's a bunch of stuff you shouldn't be involved in. But the truth is that Christianity and other religions go together as well as country music and rap, which is to say, not at all. And this is present from the very beginning. In the book of Joshua, towards the beginning of the Bible, God takes his people who were slaves and he brings them out of Egypt. And as they begin to be God's chosen people, as he makes this deal with them, there's this command. Now therefore, fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. So it's not just, oh, come here and serve God. You've got to get rid of all of this stuff that you used to bow down to. Centuries later, you have, now they are a nation, and God has given them Solomon, who is their most successful king. Solomon marries like 1,000 women, and they nag him into building them temples of the gods that they grew up with. And later on in life, Solomon goes to church with them. He goes to the temples with them, and here's how that is described again in the Bible. 1 Kings 11:6. So Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not wholly follow the Lord as David his father had done. And so Solomon, although he was a wise man and righteous in many senses, towards the end of his life, his greatest failing was the fact that his heart was divided. It wasn't enough that, oh, Solomon, sure, he continued to go to the temple in Jerusalem. The thing is that God expected his heart to be wholly his. If you skip ahead a few centuries, it progresses to this point in the book of Ezekiel. Chapter 8, verse 16. Ezekiel, in a vision, is shown something that's going on in the temple in Jerusalem. And he brought me into the inner court of the house of the Lord. And behold, at the entrance of the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, were about 25 men, with their backs to the temple of the Lord and their faces toward the east, worshiping the sun toward the east. Now, what powerful symbolism is this? Is there in the temple of the living God, in the very courts of it, and they're bowing down and worshiping the sun. To turn away from God and worship something that he had made. Now with them, this was a gradual process, something that happened over a period of time. But it's not just specifically, oh, don't bow down at their idols. There's a host of these other religious practices that were off limits to them. There's a lot of stuff that they're told to say no to. In Deuteronomy 18, here's what he says. There shall not be found among you anyone who burns his son or his daughter as an offering. So this was a part of Baal temple worship, Molech as well. But then he goes on to say this. Anyone who practices divination, which was kind of the equivalent of psychic abilities that would try and tell either the future or know hidden things, or tells fortunes, or interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or a charmer, or a medium, or a necromancer, or one who inquires of the dead. For whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord. And because of these abominations, the Lord your God is driving them out before you. So he starts with, what is common throughout the rest of the Old Testament. Don't bow down to other gods. But then he includes these other, cultural practices. So you would have, the temple worship, but then you would just have, folk religion, where people would go and inquire of people who claimed to be able to talk to the dead, or would cast a spell on your enemies. And that wasn't, specifically worshiping Molech. It was just a general spiritual practice. And yet here God says, have nothing to do with it. In fact, the death penalty was given for those who practiced these things under the law that God gave to Moses, which is the same as it was for worshiping and bowing down to other gods. So God takes this very seriously. So you have this broad category of faintly religious practices, maybe not organized, but deeply spiritual. We find the same concern in the New Testament. Acts 16:16. As they were going to the place of prayer, this is the disciples, we were met by a slave girl who had a spirit of divination and brought her owners much gain by fortune telling. And so here there's that link in the early church. They looked at this girl who was doing fortune telling. She was doing so by the activity of demons. And it was very ironic as her handlers were concerned with the profit, the money that they could get out of her, and the disciples looked at her as a person. We also find in Acts chapter 13, verse 6, again, as the disciples of early church is traveling, when they had gone through the whole island as far as Paphos, they came upon a certain magician, a Jewish false prophet named Bar-Jesus. Now the irony here is, here you've got a Jewish man claiming to be a prophet, doing exactly what his own law would have forbidden him to do, which is claiming to practice magic. And Paul, immediately after this, calls this man a son of the devil, an enemy of all righteousness, and he is struck blind for opposing the gospel. You also have Simon the magician that Philip runs into. And all throughout this, there is this gentle mocking in the book of Acts, as Luke kind of pokes fun at these people who impressed other people with their tricks, with their abilities, and then they run into the disciples, and it's like, here is real power and total mastery. Also in Acts chapter 19, again, there's this idea that these are things that you are to set aside. Also, many of those who were now believers came confessing and divulging their practices. And a number of those who practiced magic arts brought their books together and burned them in the sight of all. And they counted the value of them and found it came to 50,000 pieces of silver. Turning to Jesus for the early church meant leaving behind not just temple worship, but every kind of folk religion they had. And this is a very broad cross-section of superstitious practices in the Greek and Roman world, where you had people who consulted, sorcerers, and they would give you a magic potion to drink, or sell you a magic book, or do fortune telling, and all of it is described as things that early Christians were to separate themselves from. And so as we talk about world religions, I felt that I had to spend at least one Sunday discussing the New Age movement. Now, New Age, it's not like a religion. So most people who hold these beliefs, they're not saying like, oh, this is my religion. What it is, again, American melting pot, is they've combined elements of Hinduism and Buddhism, Chinese folk religion, and it's all blended and repackaged for Western Americans. It's like finding General Tso's chicken next to macaroni and cheese at the buffet in West Plains. Now, some of you might be thinking as we get into this, like, of course we don't mess with it. Why are you even wasting our time talking about this? Of course I know not to get into all that stuff. But we need to talk about this because it is so common in our culture. 41% of Americans believe in psychics. 41%. Including about a third of regular involved church attendance. 42% of Americans believe that spiritual energy can be found in objects, like crystals. In fact, when you ask people about beliefs in psychics, spiritual energy, reincarnation, or astrology, 60% of self-professing Christians hold to at least one of those beliefs. 47% of conservative Christians hold to at least one of those beliefs. This is massively common in the American church. And it speaks to a condition that's very similar to the Old Testament, where you had people who go to the temple of Yahweh, the living God, on Saturday, and then on Monday, they'd go and visit a fortune teller who'd give them omens about when to plant their crops. And on Tuesday, they might consult someone to talk to the dead. Here in America, we love us some Jesus on Sunday, but we will check our horoscope on Monday and cleanse our chakras or something like that on Tuesday. Now, within the church, there are two basic attitudes toward this stuff. One is that psychics are real and you shouldn't talk to them. And the second is that it's all a bunch of nonsense and you shouldn't do it. Either way, the take-home message today is, stop it. What are you guys doing? Going and getting involved in this stuff. Now, I'm firmly, by the way, in the it's all nonsense camp. You have the James Randi Foundation has a $1 million prize for many years that they've offered to anybody who can go in there, psychic, a medium, a spirit healer, crystals, and demonstrate paranormal abilities under controlled settings. They've had this offer a $1 million check. One psychic goes in there and proves their abilities, they will give them $1 million. And they've not had anybody able to do the smallest thing. Sylvia Brown, one of the most famous psychics of the past generation, kept saying that she would, and then put it off until she died. Why is it then that people embrace this stuff? A lot of it is because you're being hustled. Take your horoscopes, which, by the way, is pulled from Zoroastrianism, which was an ancient Near East religion. And so again, this is what Americans do. We take a massive ancient Near East religion and we pull parts of it out and we repackage it and we sell it to people. The idea, and this is, as a Christian, we look at it, no matter what your sign, the stars and the planets will not affect your life in any way. But here's how it works, is they make vague predictions to a large number of people. And you don't notice all the times those vague predictions are false. You notice the one time it seems to line up with your life. Y'all, I could do this with the church sign. If I put this on the church sign, hey John, you've got trouble ahead, right? At some point, there's going to be a dude named John who drives by and ends up with a flat tire, on his way to West Plains. You'd be like, oh my goodness, how did the pastor know? All it takes is one hit for them to suddenly convince you that this stuff works. It's the same thing behind psychics. Number one, they'll check your Facebook page and learn all they can about, supposedly hidden stuff in your life. And secondly, they're going to make dozens of vague assertions about your life in the hopes that just one of them will have the ring of truth. And this is easily demonstrated again and again and again. Other things that people do is equivalent to street magic. Now, I'm a fan of street magic and the close-up stuff that some of these people do. And I actually ran into it. I met somebody who claimed to be a guru. And he said, oh, I've got this, Chinese spirit energy. What I'm going to do is I'm going to root myself to the ground, and you're not going to be able to push me over. But what he did was he made me stand and push like sideways like this. Which, if you've ever tried it, you can go home and try it. You can't put hardly any weight sideways like that. And it was just a street hustle. You could find people doing essentially the same tricks all throughout history on street corners everywhere. Other people like John Edwards here next to Dr. Oz. Again, this is massive parts of American culture. John Edwards claimed that he could talk to the dead. And he had a TV show. I remember growing up, I forget the name of it, but he'd be on TV and he'd have a group of people and he would say, oh, I'm talking to the dead and I'm getting like an M sound, a M, and somebody would have an uncle whose name was Mark. And he was like, oh yeah, I'm getting something in the chest, and you know how prevalent heart disease is. And what he does is it's cold reading techniques. Same kind of thing. You throw out a bunch of vague predictions, people in the audience will hit on it. And it's super easy to fake. And by the way, you ever notice that these people who talk to the dead never end up talking to a relative who's in hell? Like it's always this vague, happy, oh yeah, she's real happy, she loves you. Like, they never talk to anybody who has like unresolved feelings toward you. And then you have the good old placebo effect. Homeopathy, again, built on faintly religious practices and mysticism. Homeopathy takes like a drop of medicine and dilutes it in water equivalent to putting a drop in the Atlantic Ocean, which is to say there's no medicine at all. And yet, if you go to the store and you buy a homeopathic remedy, placebo effect will make it appear as though it's doing something. So the James Randi Foundation used to do a thing. He would take a whole bottle of homeopathic sleeping pills and he'd chug the whole thing and say, why isn't anything happening to me? Now, even knowing these things, though, there's this powerful sense where people want something that works. So Tom Brady just won the Super Bowl right after giving an interview, said that his wife was using protection stones and mantras and had little altars and shrines for him. Because there's that attitude of, well, if she puts up the protection stones and I win the Super Bowl, then there must be something there. This is why you can go online and find a website offering to sell you $80 crystal straws that will do something with the energy of that Mountain Dew you're drinking. The same website also would sell you, psychic vampire spray, which I'm hoping was just mace. A lot of this stuff, though, what they're doing is they're preying on people who are desperate. I was thumbing through an almanac at a pharmacy, and I love reading the ads in there. And I noticed that a lot of these ads for magic charm bags were geared towards two specific people. Are you looking for love in your life? And do you need help with luck and gambling? And what they're saying is like, hey, are you 40 and single and you don't want to be? Or hey, do you have $10,000 in gambling debt? We're willing to bet you're pretty desperate, so why not try paying me $10 for a funny smelling bag? What they're doing is they're dealing with people who are desperate and willing to try anything. And you see this most of all in American culture when it comes to medical practice. Reiki, again here promoted by Dr. Oz on TV. Reiki, built on, again, ancient Eastern religious practices. It's kind of like that game you used to play with your siblings in the car where you're like, I'm not touching you, but you're like really close to them, and they say that that will spiritually heal the person. Don't do that to your wife. And so, here on that program, he's throwing it out there as, yeah, just try anything. If you're having, I think this was heart problems. Same thing, acupuncture. Now, I know some of you have tried acupuncture, know someone who has, because back pain wrecks your life. And I'll just say, I don't know, there's some theories out there that just sticking needles in random spots in your skin does something with pain gateway mechanisms. And you're not doing wrong if you're trying to explore like a medical option. However, when you go there and you look at the map that they're using to know where to stick the needles in, that is specifically drawn from ancient Chinese folk religion. In fact, they actually have, I've discovered this also, acupuncture for cats, which if I've ever seen an absolutely insane idea, go stick some needles in your cat at home. And all of this stuff, though, what they do is they find people who are desperate, and they offer to sell them stuff. I have a friend who battled cancer, and it's been ongoing for years, and I was talking to her, and she said, you would not believe the crazy stuff that people suggest I try. Because the truth is, you and I sitting here, we're not going to pay $100 for a bottle of shark fin pills, are we? But if my life is in danger, some people are wanting to try anything and everything. So it may be that I've just said all of this, and you're sitting there, you know what, Pastor Aaron? I'm not convinced. That's very nice what you just said, but that psychic one time really did tell me that one thing, or this really spooky thing happened, and this person healed my shoulder, or something like that. Now, just to remind you that the question in the Old Testament and the New Testament, it never sets out to say whether or not these sorcerers, or mediums, or psychics are actually doing anything. It leaves that question unanswered. What it says, though, is that you need to be separate from these things. There are two failures in response by the church to the New Age. And the first is to find a demon in everything. Some of you remember several years ago, there was this lady in a Facebook video who was like at some show, and she had this big like billboard thing next to her and explaining how Monster energy drinks are literally of the devil. And this whole complicated thing, something with Hebrew letters and the number 666 and all that. And what she came across is somebody who is absolutely insane. And there's always been this part of the church. I understand, like, so some people, everything I just said, I come across like that. And it is a weird spot for me to be in. But there's always been this part of the church that literally anything comes out, anything that is popular, and it is instantly labeled as demonic. You can go home and pick anything that kids are into today, and just type it in with demonic after it, and you'll find a hit on the internet. I did this fidget spinners, that you didn't know those were demonic. Yeah. And what happens is when people do this, if you want to convince young people that your beliefs are absolutely silly, find a demon in everything. The truth is, and it's all this mindset that is overly fearful of everything, and it comes across as incredibly controlling. So my mother-in-law sent me and Sarah some bath bombs that she had found. She said, oh, these smell real nice. And I looked at the packaging, and she didn't send them to us because of that, but on the packaging they were like, each one is supposed to balance a specific chakra or something in your body. And I looked at them and I was like, well, that's funny. I wonder if there's a demon in every one of these or something like that. But here's the thing, church. It's just bath salts. Nowhere in Scripture are we told to be aware of demons hiding in fidget spinners. All right? And so if you go, raw chocolate is a thing you can buy. If somebody buys you that and you eat it, it's just chocolate. It's nothing. It's empty. It's overpriced, but it's nothing. But then there's an other way that we fail in our response, which is to accept everything without ever asking questions. Sylvia Brown said, I am a God follower. I am a psychic. She said, and she knew that as long as she used religious terminology, she could cast anybody who said, what you're doing is out of line with Scripture. Oh, you're just a hater. And so you have people who come and they use religious terminology. Literally, Christian Witches Convention. Being cast, I think it's later this month. I had a friend who came out of the New Age, and actually as part of her ministry is apologetics, and she's always posting and saying, hey, Christians, here's this crazy spiritual practice. Please don't do this. And as I look at these posts, I'm like, oh my goodness, of course we shouldn't be doing that. But there's people in the church who are like, no, you shouldn't be telling us what we can and can't do. If I want to blend Christianity with anything else, I should be free to do so. I have a family member who's diagnosed with a degenerative disease. Very serious. What they did, they followed this path, right? And they first went to Pentecostal healing services at a number of different churches because they wanted to be healed. And when they weren't healed, they went elsewhere. And they found some guy who claimed to be a guru. And he said, all your problem is your spiritual energy is not aligned. And he claimed to heal them, and the symptoms went away. And now their house is littered with statues of Buddha. Do you hear the progression there? If God won't heal me, I'll find someone who will. Now hear me on this. Again, it may sound like I'm saying a lot of mean stuff about people. But everything I've just said, these are people I know. They're dear to me. I love them. And this is super close to home for me. But I hate false hope. I hate it with a passion. In the same way that a doctor who treats cancer patients hates false hope that would tell people not to do the things that would save their life, but to go drink some cinnamon tea recipe they found on Facebook instead of being cured. I do not want to see them spending their lives pursuing empty promises instead of Christ. So we say, well, how can I tell? And I just want to say, I understand that statistically, there are people sitting here that have engaged in some of the practices I've just described. And I say this not to condemn you. Because if you want to follow Jesus, I just want you to understand what he calls us to do. And my best understanding, and it's hard to nail down because this stuff is so broad and so diverse, but if you ever run into somebody who claims to be using some kind of invisible energy that cannot be objectively measured, for which there's no biological, no medical evidence, and it has religious roots, step back. That's the time for you to say, well, because I follow Jesus, I'm not to participate in this other stuff. Let me give you two examples. We have folk medicine, especially around here. Right? You get a sore throat, your grandma has a recipe for something. Make this up and drink it and you'll be fine. That has no religious connotations whatsoever. You know, if you want to make some cinnamon tea on a recipe you found on Facebook to balance your thyroid, it might be silly. It's not evil. But if you go to the chiropractor, and he says that he's going to align your spiritual energy to fix your back by rubbing certain areas of your feet. What he's asking you is to engage in a spiritual practice derived from Chinese folk religion. They have a very particular way of looking at human spirituality. And I would say, as a Christ follower, I tend to say, leave my feet alone. Thank you. You say, well, how can we keep people from going down this path? The biggest thing I would say is that when we learn to trust God, it makes the other things feel empty. Isaiah chapter 8 says this, and when they say to you, inquire of the mediums and the necromancers who chirp and mutter, should not a people inquire of their God? Should they inquire of the dead on behalf of the living? And it has this cry, to the teaching and to the testimony. Why would you ask dead people questions when the God who created the heavens and the earth will answer your prayers? Why would you consult a psychic? God actually knows the future, and there is a reason he hasn't told you what's going to happen tomorrow. Do you trust him? Why would I buy some crystal for healing energy when the Holy Spirit, not a force, but the Spirit of God himself, who brought Jesus back from the dead, lives in me? And he calls them back. He says, to the teaching and to the testimony. In Scripture, we have answers that no medium, no psychic could ever give us. Again, in Colossians chapter 2, verses 8 through 10. See to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the world, and not according to Christ. And all of these things, what they have in common is they pull people's attention and their focus away from Jesus. But it says, for in him the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily. You understand who Jesus is, and that will make everything else seem lesser. He says, you have been filled in him, who is the head of all rule and authority. If you are satisfied in Jesus, if you trust God's plans for your life, his ability to see you through, everything else is revealed for the empty lies that it is. If you are filled in him, you have no need of that other stuff. In the same way that I have no need for the Tinder app on my phone. Quite satisfied with Sarah. I have no need to be looking elsewhere. So even if everything I've just said today, you're like, of course, I've never done that, I've never had any curiosity about that, I never plan on doing it. I invite you today to find your satisfaction in Christ, because what that means is that there's a million other things this world will try and sell you. But when you're filled in him, saying no, it's all that much easier. Let's pray. God, I pray that as we consider these things, you would give us a spirit of gentleness, respect as we deal with people around us. That we do not speak about the difference between good and evil simply to condemn people. That we are called to discern, to choose wisely in our actions and where the loyalties of our heart lie. So God, I pray that you would become greater and we would become lesser. That even should we find ourselves in a position of desperate, desperate need, that in you and in you alone we would find what we were looking for. In Jesus' name, amen.